78. Thou shalt not destroy. In the laws of warfare, it's stated, when thou shalt besiege a city a long time, in making war against it to take it, thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof by forcing an axe against them. For thou mayest eat of them, and thou shalt not cut them down. For the tree of the field is man's life, to employ them in the siege. Only the trees which thou knowest that they be not trees for meat, thou shalt destroy and cut them down. And thou shalt build bulwarks against the city that maketh war with thee, until it be subdued. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 19 to 20. In understanding this law, we must remember that it is case law, that is, a specific example which illustrates a broad principle. It is necessary then to note, first, that the ancient Hebraic interpretation of this law is that it represents a general principle, a prohibition against wanton destruction, in particular of anything protected by God's law and of use to man. This prohibition included not only an enemy's possessions or a neighbour's, but one's own. The interpretation has continued in Judaism, and it has been greatly stressed through the centuries by the rabbis, as witness Rabbi Gansfried, who declared, just as one must be careful not to destroy one's body, nor to impair or injure it, so must one be careful not to destroy, impair, or damage one's property. Whoever breaks a utensil, or tears a garment, or destroys food and drink, or filthies them, or throws money away so that it is lost, or who spoils any other thing that is fit for human enjoyment, transgresses the command, thou shalt not destroy. The statement is correct as to details, although humanistic in its emphasis. The test is not human enjoyment, but God's property rights. God permits the use of non-fruit trees. He does not permit the use of fruit trees to build bulwarks, nor their destruction during war, or in enmity under any circumstances. Second, the fruit tree represents sown land, cultivated areas as against the wilderness, and it is therefore protected because it represents an area of dominion, of the subduing of the earth. There is, however, no blanket call for the destruction of wilderness trees. They too are God's property. Necessity, whether of war or peace, can lead to their use. However, wanton destruction anywhere is banned. Thou shalt not destroy is a basic principle everywhere. Third, total war is prohibited, either against man or against his land. From Calvin to the present, many have rendered what the King James Version translates, for the tree of the field is man's life, etc., as, are the trees of the field people, defenders of the city, that you should lay siege to them? We can declare war against men, but not against the earth, not against God, without incurring his radical judgment. As far as is known, no similar law has ever existed apart from biblical law. It is in particular significant that, on the brink of a war to destroy the Canaanites totally, Israel was still prohibited from warring against God's earth. Fourth, even in wartime, God's purpose, the furthering of life for the purposes of godly dominion, must be obeyed. The fruit trees cannot be cut down because the men can eat the fruit during the siege, as well as later. A fruit tree is a continuing wealth and legacy. It is a form of dominion. The earth yields its increase to man through the tree, and therefore Any wanton destruction of such a tree is a denial of the priority of God's purpose. Not even so bitter a warfare as that waged against Canaan could justify such a destruction of the earth's wealth. The riches of the ungodly are to enrich the kingdom of God. Isaiah chapter 61 verse 6 declares, Ye shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory shall ye boast yourselves. The wealth of the world is God's property, and to be our inheritance in Him. Fifth, beyond this, there is God's concern for His creation, for animals and birds. His law reminds us to be mindful of them. After the gleaners take their fill, the wild animals are entitled to eat in the Sabbath year. Exodus chapter 23 verses 10 and 11, Leviticus chapter 25 verses 3 to 7. Even the animal is worthy of his hire and must not be muzzled when treading out the corn. Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 4, 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 18. Domestic animals are entitled to the Sabbath rest. Exodus chapter 20 verses 8 to 10, Deuteronomy chapter 5 verses 12 to 14. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 10, and the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. John chapter 10 verse 11. An animal in distress must be aided. Exodus chapter 23 verse 5, Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 4. Stray animals were to be returned to their owners. Exodus chapter 23 verse 4. The life of a bird species was protected. Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 6, and so on. God's concern is not only with and for man, although man is his appointed vicegerent and his image bearer. God is mindful of the sparrows of the field. Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 to 31. Sixth, man cannot therefore use the earth, its animal creation, nor himself, apart from the purposes of God. God has created all things for His purpose and glory, and nothing can legitimately be used or viewed apart from His purpose. Hence, thou shalt not destroy means that God's purpose must prevail, and that we use all things and ourselves only in obedience to Him. Seventh, thou shalt not destroy has as its positive form, thou shalt plant or thou shalt build. The Garden of Eden, planted by God, is to be the model for all the earth. Man must exercise dominion and subdue the earth. This is not done by the destruction of any good things such as fruit trees. However, neither is it done by negation. It is done by obedience to God's creation mandate, by the exercise of dominion. This can mean war against God's enemies, but even in war, the fruit tree, an example of increase and harvest, gains priority over the immediate demands of warfare. Man too often assumes that mere negation is virtue. Thus, Christians too often equate Christian action with fighting vice, immodesty, heresy, and the like. Conservatives equate their faith too often with fighting liberalism, socialism, lawlessness, and the like. Liberals and radicals in turn commonly equate their faith with a war against wealth, against poverty, discrimination, inequality, and so on. However, we can have full possession of a good field and spend 50 years fighting weeds therein and make little progress. At the first opportunity, the weeds will be there again in full force, or, by that time, the field may be dead and sterile. A more productive course is to plant the field in fruit trees and husband them. The weeds, then, will be a minor matter in comparison to the task of gaining and developing an increase from the earth. The requirement that we refrain from destroying even an enemy's fruit trees turns our attention beyond the warfare of the moment to the basic task. When men and nations forget this, God and history pass them by. There was a time when this law was a very familiar one. Most of us were brought up to regard waste and wanton destruction as sin. For most of us, the biblical context was gone, although some of us had these words cited to us: "Thou shalt not destroy." Without the God-centered context, however, this once basic teaching eroded and largely disappeared. Its remnants in the conservation and ecology movements are often essentially suicidal in their concerns, not godly, and hence their unhappy emphases.